Hey, Richard Azerga here. I've been wanting a new desk for my home studio office for a while now. This is my current setup. It gets the job done. It certainly feels cramped. It's not friendly for rack gear. My monitors are too low, and there's a lot of wasted space in the back. So it's really not the ideal setup. So I searched around for an affordable studio desk and found the Platform Desk by Output. I thought it had a really cool looking design, offered most of what I wanted in a studio desk, and it was priced under $800. Now that's a pretty good price for even a normal desk, much less a studio desk. So I'd be happy paying $800, but there were a few design things that I thought were a little bit awkward. Most specifically, I didn't like how the rack mounts were inset. I felt like it would be really awkward working with knobs or cables that were close to the edges. So I decided to build my own improved version of the desk with angled rack mounts. Now, the fine folks over at Output have a marketing video for the desk that briefly shows all of the measurements. So if you wanted to build it exactly like theirs, you could easily reference those measurements and create a clone. However, you might be better off just buying the platform desk. Again, I think $800 is a good price for it. And I would estimate that the desk that I built was about $250, but 3 solid days of building and finishing. So you take your time into consideration, and it might be better off just buying it. In the end, I really didn't use any of their measurements because I needed to be very precise in the height of the shelf to accommodate an angled rack. It basically came down to a few static measurements and then using basic geometry to figure out all the other measurements. Let's take a look. I wanted the desk to be 36 inches deep, 37 inches high with a 16-inch shelf. So with a total depth of 36 inches minus the 16 for the shelf, I'm left with 20 inches here at the top and bottom. And I can just use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out the hypotenuse, the length of this main side, which ends up being 42 and 1/16 of an inch. I can also use these measurements to calculate the angle. So this would just be a tangent opposite over adjacent, and I come up with 61.6 degrees. So you get the idea. It's all basic geometry, and you can figure out basically all the measurements based on a few static parameters. A few other things that are important in terms of static parameters is that a standard rack width is 19 inches. And then I also put 4U angled rack mounts instead of the 3U vertical rack mounts that the platform desk offers. So 4U is going to be exactly 7 inches high, which ends up being my hypotenuse for this shelf extension. And then finally, I used a 3/4 inch birch plywood. It's a really high quality birch plywood that comes in 5 foot by 5 foot sheets. And so that, again, comes important when you do some of these calculations. Pretty much everything is that 3/4 inch Russian birch, except for a few places where it's actually doubled up, which is the tabletop and then the secondary sides. My measured drawings, including cutout plans for maximizing the plywood, are available in the description. I should note that 5 foot by 5 foot sheets of plywood are a little bit awkward to transport, and I don't have a truck. So I had the hardwood store perform some courtesy cuts for me so that I could fit them into my car. The cutout plan shows the location of those courtesy cuts. To accommodate angled racks, I actually had to make a cutout in the desktop so rack gear could go through the desktop. This was by far the most complicated task of the build because, first of all, the desktop is made of 2 sandwich sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, making it a full 1.5 inches thick. And that bevel is 61.6 degrees, which is not what a normal saw can cut. Normally they go up to about 45 degrees. So I had to manually cut this with a handsaw very slowly and then come back with a sander and get it nice and smooth. I suppose I could have cut it off straight, but I wanted to keep as much material as I could for attaching the desktop to the sides. But it does a really nice job of cradling the gear, at least the gear that might be on the bottom of the rack. I also didn't put rack mounts in the middle section because I just got a new mixer that I wanted to fit in there that has DAW control, and it's kind of one of the reasons I undertook this project. One of the areas where I cut corners is in cable management. The platform desk has a lot of cable cutouts in the desktop and has a really nice cable channel in the back. And I didn't do any of this, mainly because I wanted to break the desk in and really feel like where I needed some cutouts maybe, so it's something that I can easily add later. I also didn't add the knee cutout in the keyboard tray. I know the platform desk has this. To me, it just looked awkward, and there were a few online reviews of people complaining about catching corners with their legs, so I didn't do that. Cutting all the boards and getting it fit together is something you can probably do in just an afternoon. And really, all you need is a really good circular saw and a straight edge. I would recommend a fine tooth blade that's good at cross cutting against the grain. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of burrs on the ends of those cross grain cuts. Because I have it, I did use a table saw and a router just to do some additional things. For the router, I mainly used it to chamber the bottom ply of the tabletop just to make it lighter to carry. You could certainly do the entire tabletop as two sheets of plywood, but that again, chambering that bottom section just going to make it a lot easier to carry. Now, as much as I love building furniture, finishing it is going to take a lot longer than actually cutting the board. So finishing it, I would say, would take double or triple the time of cutting an assembly. In my case, I finished the desk with 3 coats of shellac, sanding lightly in between each coat, and then topping it with a nice coat of beeswax. And I think it put just a really, really nice finish on it, nice satin finish. And so you can get both of those both the shellac and the beeswax just at a normal hardware store. Normally, when I build furniture, I assemble the furniture and finish it while it's assembled. This time, I actually finished all of the parts individually and then did a final assembly, and I'm really pleased with how that turned out. So I might do a little bit more of that in the future, but it's totally an optional step when you do this. I'm really pleased with how the desk turned out. I love the angled racks. They're exactly what I was looking for, and I'm glad I went the extra step to design it that way. So again, I'll have links to the measured drawings in the description. I'll also include a few additional links for some different parts that I found helpful off Amazon, including the actual rack mounts. And so good luck if you want to try taking on something like this. Certainly do that. Otherwise, I do think that the platform desk by Output, if you're fine with the normal rack mounts, I think it's a great value at $800.